How is Jesus a righteous king? Jeremiah 33:15, in those days and at that time, I will cause a righteous branch to sprout up for David, and he will administer justice and righteousness in the land. Look at that wording, righteous branch. And it's wanting us to give, and if you have a coloring sheet, the kids have the coloring sheets, and then sometimes a couple of the adults have them, you've got a stump there, and out of the stump is a branch coming out. And what effectively happens is, if you cut down a tree, anyone ever cut down a tree? You have to either kill the stump or you have to remove the stump, bore it out or yank it out or whatever. Because what will happen if you just cut it off is it'll shoot up a branch. And I'm not 100% sure, I forget, but there might be a little crown hanging from the leaf on that branch. And that's how it's depicted sometimes. And the reason for that is to say that if the trunk is David's family tree, right? If that's his tree, and it's been cut down. There hasn't been a king in David's line in Israel for hundreds of years, not since pre-exile. And so there hasn't been a king on that throne, but there's a promise that that tree is going to come back to life, and that shoot that comes out, that branch is going to be the king. And we believe that king is Jesus, because that's what Jeremiah prophesies, right? That there's going to be a righteous king. Now, even David, if you think about David, though, you can compare him to the wicked kings of Israel. And the wicked kings of Israel were wicked in a different way than other people are wicked. They were wicked because they were worshiping gods who were not God. They were wicked on a whole nother level. They were taking the entire nation of Israel and dragging them through idol worship. Taking them to the worship of other gods and neglecting Yahweh God. Many of them defiled God's temple even. And they would worship in places they weren't supposed to worship, and they would worship in ways that are an abomination to how Yahweh says he is to be worshipped. And they're bringing the whole kingdom through it. And so they're particularly abominable, you could say, as kings. Now what's interesting is David wasn't like that. David was always had his eyes on Yahweh God. He was always faithful, you could say, to Yahweh. And yet David was also a sinner. And you know David's story. That David had an affair with his friend Uriah's wife. And then she got pregnant. And then he tried to, through deceit, make Uriah think it was his kid. And when that didn't work, he took Uriah and he sent him to the front lines and had him killed in a military battle. And then, out of piety, certainly he doesn't want Bathsheba to be a single mother, so then he brings her in as a wife so that he can raise his son with Bathsheba. And it's really interesting because when the prophets go to the wicked kings of Israel, the kings of Israel kill the prophets. But when the prophet Nathan came to David and he says, what do you think about a guy who does this sort of thing, that kills his best friends to cover up his adultery? David's like, that's horrible. That should never happen. And Nathan says, that man is you, to David. And David repents. And he mourns his sin. And he returns to Yahweh and he worships and mourns before him. And he revels in the grace that God has given him. He doesn't kill the prophet. He listens to the prophet of God and he learns from him. He grows. He returns to Yahweh. And so David's not a king in the same way. And yet, can we call David a righteous king? We really can't. David made all kinds of mistakes. He even made mistakes as a king. And so David was an imperfect king. He sinned greatly, but he led the nation well. He was faithful in worship of Yahweh. And like David, the righteous branch is also faithful to Yahweh, but different in this way. He is without sin. He always lives righteously. And in case you've ever wondered, it seems obvious to me as you read the New Testament that Jesus is depicted as this sinless, righteous man. But then it seems interesting to me that countless times in the Bible, we're told that he was without sin. And I guess just to put an exclamation point on it and to say, not with any sin in any way. Look what Peter said. He said, he did not commit sin and no deceit was found in his mouth. Paul said, Jesus knew no sin. John said, in him there is no sin. The author to the letter of the Hebrews said that Jesus had been tempted in every way, has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. In John, Pilate said, I find no guilt in him. Isaiah prophesied of the Messiah. He had done no violence and had not spoken deceitfully. And here in Jeremiah, Jesus is called the righteous branch of David. And so the Jews expected to have this king in the line of David, but he wasn't going to be like David, unrighteous. He was going to be unlike David, completely righteous. You could say a better David. Jesus checked those boxes for them. Righteous, in the line of David. You think of the Jews in the New Testament, they could look at Jesus and they're like, dang man, this guy's filling all of these. He might be the Messiah. You can imagine the excitement in their voices.